had gathered here many groups, women's groups and Dalit groups and other groups also, to do show the solidarity to the Bilkis Bano's family. So our main demand is the culprits has to go to the jail.
जब वो 5 महीने की उम्र से औरत थी तो उनका बलात्कार किया गया, वो भी एक आदमी ने नहीं 11 आदमियों ने किया गया है। और इसके बाद भी हमारी गवर्नमेंट को कुछ नहीं ये हुआ कि वो कितने इतने लोग बलात्कार करने के बाद भी उनको 15 अगस्त को उन मिठाई और हार डाल के, मिठाई खिला के और हार डाल के उनको रिलीज़ किया गया है। क्यों रिलीज़ किया गया है? अगर इसी तरह चलता रहा तो कितने लोग, कितने और लड़कियों का बलात्कार होगा।
वही बात है, उन 11 लोगों को तो जेल वापस भेजना ही है।
While India was celebrating 75 years of independence, Bilkis Bano was stripped of her basic living rights. I'm Durdana Simran and you're watching me on Salar. Discussing this with me today, we have Madhu Bhushan as well as BT Venkatesh. She is a woman activist and he is a lawyer. We're going to be discussing about the Bilkis Bano rape case. So, ma'am, you're a full-time woman activist and, looking at this case when the culprits were left off, what was your first reaction?
Well, first reaction was obviously of horror. And it was also wondering what is going through Bilkis Bano's mind and heart. Because one knows what she has been through. I think as women's rights activists, we have seen the horror of Gujarat and the riots of Gujarat and the impact on women and the impact on women's bodies.
Right.
Because there were mass rapes conducted during the riots. And I think that was very, rapes are always a kind of, in a way, part of any conflict or wars. Okay. But I think this happening at this point of time in our lives, we've always associated rapes in times of wars, older, conquests. Rapes of women have been very part of conquests. Okay, it's a very male way of exercising power and control and authority,
right.
Not only on women but on the communities and the areas that they come from.
Right.
But to see that manifesting itself in our time and age, I think was absolutely horrifying, and it also signaled the kind of the increasing, hold of the Hindu right wing or the Hindu Taliban, as he would say.
Right.
I think it's really signifying the kind of the greater consolidation of those kind of forces at the cost of women,
Right.
at the cost of women's bodies. So I think yes, it was absolute horror to think that Bilkis, who had been through so much of pain and agony at that time, seeing the death of her children, of her child,
Yeah.
her family, her mother, her sisters being raped, and having fought for justice. I mean, that's something that we can never forget. How Bilkis really fought, and as she says, she fought not only for herself, she fought so that India could be a safer and secure place for all women.
Right.
And I think she fought for that for 20 years, and the NHRC, the Supreme Court, had to come to her help to ensure that she got justice, and she did get justice 20 years down the line.
Yeah.
But it took 20 years, and we can only imagine at what cost she got that.
Yeah.
And to think that barely a few years later, it can be that justice can be just snatched away from her with such absolute callousness and cruelty, I think signifies the kind of society that we are becoming, the kind of dehumanized society that we are becoming, not only because of the release of the rapists,
Yeah.
but the celebration of their release.
Right.
I think that was like, putting layering one horror on top of another horror.
Yeah.
Is this what we have become? I think so. One, the horror was for Bilkis, and then the horror is for the kind of society that we are becoming, where we are celebrating and felicitating and garlanding, men who perpetrated the worst kind of crimes that you can think of.
Yeah. So coming back to my question, it would be when this happens, this is a very mental state of mind, that this is the way that they think that women would be able to shut them down, right? So is this is a Bilkis Bano case where everyone's speaking about it, but there are so many that go unreported. And I'm pretty sure because you work on with women so closely and you see their plight and you see so many of them going through so much. What is the one common factor when most women come to you when it's a rape case?
See, I think what women face when they go through this kind of sexual violence is, apart from the violence itself, I think it's the kind of the violence that the society around them perpetuates and
Right.
perpetrates. Okay, and that starts from people around them who say, you know, if she's been raped, she must have asked for it. I mean, that's very common.
Yeah.
It happens with sexual harassment. It happens with sexual violence. It happens with rape. So obviously, the woman has somewhere asked for it. I mean, no sane man will go around raping women, you know, unless she has provoked him. I mean, that is the
Yeah,
normal
mentality.
patriarchal mindset. Okay?
Yeah.
So what she has to face is not only the kind of violence that has happened to her bodily, and in terms of her, you know, emotionally and psychologically. I think it's also, as I said, the kind of skepticism from everybody around, and that gets reflected onto the system because it's very systemic.
Yeah.
You know, because then you see, and this is very common. You know, the police, that has been our fight also with the
Yeah.
system, with the systemic way in which, you know, this violence gets endorsed and legitimized. You know, and women can't get. That's why it's so difficult for a woman who's a victim of rape to get justice. It's extremely difficult.
Yeah.
You know, so it starts from the police, because normally the police are extremely careless.
Yeah.
They don't conduct their investigations properly. They don't gather evidence. So all these are the foundations, you know, for ensuring that she doesn't get justice.
Right.
So one is first the disbelief that, you know, that she has been raped, and that's how she's responsible for her own rape.
Right.
And then the lack of, you know, kind of lack of responsibility on behalf of the system to really ensure that she gets justice.
Yeah.
So that never happens. Okay. And I think we've seen this systematically happen in not only individual, you know, rape cases, but when it becomes a, you know, exercise. See, rape is anyway, it's an exercise of power and control. Okay.
Right.
Even in individual cases of rape, it is an exercise of power and control, of patriarchal power and control.
Right.
It's a control over her sexuality. It's kind of conquering her sexuality, you know, in that sense, or maybe punishing her.
Right.
You know, so whatever it is an exercise of power and control. That's in individual cases. But when you see rape as it is also part of a systemic way of exercising power and authority.
Yeah.
Okay, so it becomes part of a whole, you know, society which is so stratified and so layered.
Yeah.
So you also see this, like, say, when a woman from the Dalit community, or from a minority community, or an Adivasi woman, or a woman from the Basti, or the, you know, or the, you know, Bastis are raped.
Yeah.
The seriousness with which those rapes are seen is very different from the seriousness with which, say, a woman from a more privileged, you know,
Right.
class and community will be viewed.
Yeah. So, my first question to you would be, what is, you know, the first step that when something like this happens? Because most women aren't even aware of what they need to do, right? Because A, they're already dealing with the trauma that they face, that they've gone through. B, it's, you know, who do you go to? Do you go to the society, which could also be your family? Do you feel that, you know, that you're ashamed? You feel, what if they shun me? That is the thing that is going on in their mind already. And with that, you have to deal with the system to fight for your justice. So what is it like? What are the first few steps that, you know, anyone across all throughout the country needs to do when unfortunately an incident happens like this?
See, one of the major challenges that we have today is that the entire framework of law, by and large, is patriarchal in nature. Whether like it, whether we don't like it.
Yeah.
The mindset in judicial system, and by and large, patriarchal. While people may find fault with my statement of this nature, no, we have been fighting for rights of justice, the laws have been made related to women's rights are concerned. Irrespective of all these statutes that we have, the kind of changes that we have brought into law, there is hardly serious intention in implementing the law. For example, whether you talk in terms of, say, Amendment of Evidence Act, that when a woman says no consent,
Right.
it means no consent is
Right.
presumed.
Yeah.
And despite all that aspect, consent is something which is happily argued in the court, and people get away from the crime on the ground of consent.
Okay.
The consensual kind of a construct. So when you talk in terms of the burden of proof being on the accused, the
Right.
kind of reverse burden, we talk in terms of under the law relating to rape is concerned, or POCSO, any of these offences which we have. despite all that, the initial burden is again brought into on the prosecution, and that women has to go through so much of pain in the whole construct of these cases.
Right.
And the nature of uncomfortable situation that she has to face is in clause, and there are so many aspects to it. First and foremost, the families at the family level, it is not allowed to speak about the same. Maryada, the honor, and घर की इज्जत.
Yeah.
If you talk any of these particular things, the families don't like to lodge a complaint on that. They always construct of what would be the consequences. In fact, there is a whole movie on this aspect in Tamil. Forgot the name of the.
Or even Pink for that matter, right?
No, they're very old 1970s movie
Okay.
of Tamil, which was made on the very specific subject relating to rape is concerned. And that's something which questions in us that we try to close this particular thing.
Yeah.
And a woman who has been raped is looked upon as someone who is willingly subjected herself to it. I don't know, it may be a very old kind of a statement which I make, but the reality is never willing to fade. The kind of situation, this kind of arguments are never willing to fade, because that's the reality of this particular country. In fact, for example, when I'm talking this weekend or coming week, I'm going to argue a case of Dev whose husband has sought.
Okay.
He says that in the grounds of cruelty, he is one of the ground which he talks in terms of is that the wife has not discharged her sexual obligations. Can you imagine
Okay.
that she has not discharged her matrimonial sexual obligations? The word specifically employed. Where that kind of audacity comes from, that making a statement of bill that's being discussed, debated, and coming to the High Court, if that's the kind of tone and tenor of a relationship, a marital relationship, and it's being heard, discussed, we come across the patriarchies writ large in this system, judicial system. Or you can look at the perceptions relating to the cruelty to women is concerned. That by and large it is constructed as that she is lodging a false complaint. So when you look at any of these aspects, the burden on women is so heavy. To even come out and lodge a complaint is a very, very difficult thing. In fact, when we talk about Bilkis Bano's case, we all forgot in the melee of all the noise that happened, we forgot the statement made by Justice Sujata Manohar.
Yeah.
Justice Sujata Manohar was former Chief Judge of the Supreme Court of India. She was also head of the National Human Rights Commission. She said that this is a miserable failure of rule of law. Where is rule of law? There is no rule of law.
Right.
The construct of rule of law in India has been always a mirage for millions. It's always a mirage for millions, more particularly, in fact, Madhu was referring to, when you talk in terms of justice, it always starts with where you come from.
Right.
What's your location? What's your status? What's your standing in the society? Economic, social, political, every aspect of it. That matters. And there's a sad reality. Look at this particular case. If it were to be any other civilized society, it would not have been possible for them to even dream of making a petition of this nature. In Bilkis Bano's case, it's a very systematic way it has been done.
Right.
Most of us, we forget that. When you say that how these guys came to be released,
Right.
they came to be released on a petition by one of them, who made it to the High Court, stating that I have done enough number of years, 13 years, 14 years in prison, I may be enlarged, my sentence may be remitted. He petitions Gujarat High Court. Gujarat High Court says it's a decision of the state government. I cannot interfere in this. So therefore, as against which he approaches Supreme Court. But there is a twist in that. When he makes a petition to the Supreme Court, he also says that under the 1992 law relating to the remission of sentences are concerned, I need to be considered as on the date when the sentence came to be passed in 2008, conviction was passed. The law relating to remission which was existing was that of 1992 law.
So what is the usual, sentence for like a rape convict?
See, here it is not the case. See, Bilkis Bano case you should understand. It is not the case of rape. It is the case of rape and brutal murder. And this entire rape and murder was premeditated. You understand that?
Yeah.
It was not some provocation, it's a premeditated act. You have Bilkis Bano and her family, 17 to 20 of them, traveling in a truck. A mob of 35 attacked them. They're scared.
Yeah.
6 of them escaped. The rest of them were caught. And 10 of them were killed. Brutally raped and murdered in presence. Mother, sister, Bilkis Bano, everybody.
Yeah.
In the presence. A child smashed to death is the report, the sentence which is done. When the gruesome rape and murder, it's a case of gruesome rape and murder. In a case of gruesome rape and murder, the yardstick that need to be employed relating to remission of sentences are very.
Yeah.
If you look at the way we talk in terms of the death sentence, we are opposed to death sentence in this country.
Yeah.
However, look at the kind of offences that have taken place in our country. For example, Department of Justice case or the Nirbhaya case, or many of these cases where death sentence was debated and all that. You look at that and you look at this particular case, the gravity of the offence which would go to show that in all these cases death sentence was awarded. So look at this case of Bilkis Bano. For 2 years they did not register a complaint.
Yeah.
It demonstrates, in fact, even today, one of the strangest things, despite the fact that we have Supreme Court which passes judgment saying that these are the directions issued for arrest, these are the directions issued for detention,
Yeah.
these are the directions issued regarding lodging of the complaint. Every particular thing is in place. We follow all those rights which are vested in the kind of developed part of the world. We enacted judgments, issued directions, guidelines, everything. But it's painfully difficult for anyone to lodge a complaint
Yeah.
in this country when I was on this day. And whenever women goes to lodge a complaint, she is suspected to be someone who is at fault. That is the notion, the understanding with which the police function.
But in Bilkis Bano's case, like you mentioned, that it wasn't just a rape case. You have to see that the gravity of it, which was the murder, the rape, as well as the minority of women.
In any other civil society, I'm talking in terms of a civil society, in any other civil society, there was no possibility at any point of time release of accused who have been convicted for life in such offences. No possibility at all.
So why do you think this
Now,
happened?
one aspect is that in our own case, when I was referring to my own as a tenure as a prosecutor, and I had sought for remission of sentence for the accused persons, went all the way to Supreme Court for the same. In that matter, there is a very strict, clear understanding. Some offences you cannot even approach for remission of sentences. In a case where a person has offences related to drug abuse and death, no remission. In respect of human trafficking resulting in death, no remission. In case of rape and murder, no remission. The construct we talk in terms of is that these are the offences wherein there is no possibility of remission of sentences. Those life convicts are excluded. Their applications are excluded from being considered for remission because they are not entitled to it. So therefore, in Bilkis Bano's case,
So isn't it shocking?
similar law was done in Gujarat in 2014. But the whole process was that this application was considered under 1992 law because nobody has envisaged in nature of this kind of thing happening in this country. So when you look at this construct of law, the way it has been manipulated and done in a case, that it becomes possible for people like this to work out.
Yeah.
As a person who worked as a prosecutor, been in defense as well, that in number of cases we come across in prisons, prisoners who are accused of rape and murder are considered to be inhuman among the prisoners. They are not considered to be someone. See, you cannot be. There's nothing called Mardangi when you talk in terms of rape and murder, right?
Right.
So you are not somebody who has done. So the construct notion which you talk in terms of, when Madhu was referring to, when you talk of rape, it's predominantly a question of power.
Right.
The manifestation of power, by manifestation of the control over the person. So that's the construct we talk in terms of. It's looked down upon. Now, when something which is looked down upon in the prison system, looked down upon under the law, looked down upon in the process of remission, for the first time we come across that it is being celebrated, is an absolute shocker. That it demonstrates it's so inhuman, base in humanity. It demonstrates that how low we have become as a society.
Yeah.
And if it is being not protested or questioned, would go to show that we have failed as a state employing rule of law. That rule of law does not exist here in this place.
Right.
Because you cannot have someone walk out of the prison and being hugged, celebrated, sweets distributed, garlanded. It's a shocker.
I think what happened here was also the fact that, you know, like you mentioned, the audacity was about that they were celebrated. They've already done something like this, and then when you see, you know, like them being garlanded and all of them being celebrated when they're out of prison, someone who's been through this, I can't even fathom to imagine what she must have been through, because so many years of getting the justice and then seeing them out there is just so gruesome. But you know, when we're talking about their good behavior, you know, quote unquote, their good behavior, and we're also talking about being morally right in a society like India, where you're grown up with so many sanskars and so many values that are taught to you guys, right? So what is the one thing that you think is, you know, why are they celebrated like this? Like, it was shocking for all of us. It was not something that any of us expected. But do you think that this happened also because it was during the Gujarat riot times? Could this have been dealt differently if it was just, you know, a case that we had seen or heard of?
See, you know, in the women's movement, where we've been dealing with cases of violence against women, be it domestic violence, sexual violence, rapes, all the various spectrums of violence against women, we realize that, you know, perhaps, you know, retributive justice is not the only way to bring about change and transformation. Okay? So first of all, on the question of remission, you know, or of death penalty, we have, even in the women's movement, in the worst of cases, we have said that we don't believe in death penalty. Okay, and even remission, we are not in principle against remission. Okay,
Right.
if a person is willing to reform and changes, like even when we are doing cases of domestic violence, for example, if the man, you know, kind of says that what he has done is wrong and he wants to give it another chance, yes, as long as, you know, the woman is secure enough and he has changed and transformed, you can give space, you know, for that kind of for that relationship to be, you know, to be re-established. But I think in this case, what is very clear is that there is no question of any kind of reformation in the men.
Right.
Because when they come out, you know, they're celebrated. Okay, and it's not as if they have apologized or they have done. They have not apologized. If they even come out and apologized and said that, okay, what we have done is wrong and it has gone against our sanskar,
Yeah.
then I will accept that sanskar. Because then you have not been true to that sanskar that you have, you know, that you have, that you are supposedly born with. But here they have not said a word. Okay, I mean, they've just come out, look very happy with themselves. They've been garlanded, they've been fed sweets. People have fallen at their feet and taken their blessings. But I think what was worse was that the people who garlanded them, okay, are in power.
Yeah.
That is why I said, see, rape is a question of power, right?
Yeah.
It's a question not only of the individual power of the rapist, but also the power that the rapists get from the system that they are embedded in.
Right.
Okay, so which is why we've always very strongly questioned, for example, custodial rape. Okay, saying rape by policemen or rape by people in positions of power and authority, rape by the military.
Right.
Okay, so this is what we have constantly questioned, saying power, you know, like I said, individual power has to be questioned, but I think institutional power is far more serious, and it's the impunity that institutional power carries, you know, has to be questioned, and the rule of law has to accommodate for that. You know, and in fact, this was very sharply, you know, after the Nirbhaya case, you know, there was a Justice Verma commission that had been set up, and I think that was a fantastic moment for us to really redefine, you know, and to accommodate the impunity, you know, given by those rapists who are embedded in positions of power. Whatever is the power that, you know, that they're, you know, that endorses and legitimizes whatever act. Like, for example, you know, custodial rapes, you know, because that is something that has been a big issue. And that was a moment in which, you know, the principles of jurisprudence could have changed, because we did speak about, and even Justice Verma did uphold, because many of the women's groups that had been consulted, you know, we said there should be some kind of to hold, you know, them responsible. You know, there has to be a line of, you know, there's a command authority, something called command authority.
Right.
So it's not just that individual rapist, but that system that has, you know, endorsed it. As for example, you know, rapes by the military.
Yeah.
You know, so these are things that have to be taken very, very seriously. You know, like I said, individual men get away with it, but when an institution is endorsing it, that is even more criminal. You know, so you need to build into this rule of law, you know, that kind of an impunity as well, not just individual impunity, but institutional impunity.
And
here, I think this was violated at all levels.
Right.
Absolutely at all levels. You know, so you had, you know, not only that there was remission that happened, and on the grounds that BT has said that the remission happened, but then you had, you know, when you say sanskar, like I said, if you're true to your sanskar, I would have expected these men to come out and say what we did was wrong. And Bilkis Bano is, I don't know, you want to say she's your sister? I mean, something to say that, you know, what you have done is wrong. But instead, what do you have? Where do you have sanskar being spoken about? By the men who are on the panel who released these, and they're men. Okay, I don't think there were any women on that panel. There were men, and from the ruling party who were on the panel, and they released them. And on what grounds? They released them saying that because they come from good families and they're Brahmins, and therefore they come from a good sanskar. So by being born into a particular community, does it mean then that you carry an inbuilt impunity? You can do what you want, and you will not be held answerable or accountable by anybody? You know, is that the message then that we are trying to say? So which is where it comes to the question of, are these men then being rewarded for what they did? By what they did 20 years ago? They were punished. And actually, and that is the irony of it all. Okay. Now the Gujarat state institutions tried to cover up the crime 20 years ago. They tried to cover it up. In fact, the police said, yes, it has happened, but we couldn't find evidence. Why couldn't they find evidence? Because they didn't want to gather it. They failed to do, you know, proper, you know, the evidence was not collected. The medical treatment, she had to be sent for medical examination, which is all very routine, by the way. In all rape cases, this is what happens, which is where the impunity of the man is there. Okay, but this is a high-profile case. Okay, this is the context is what was it? It was the riots, and it was in fact a crime against humanity that had been committed at that point of time. Because you're not talking of the rape of one woman. You're not talking of the murder of 2 or 3 people. You're talking of the murders of thousands of people. And you're talking of the rapes of hundreds of women. Okay, and only a few spoke out. Only a few spoke out. Okay, so what has happened is, you know, like I said, it's not just, so 20 years ago, you know, the crime had sought to be covered up by the state institutions, be it the police and be it, unfortunately, the courts, which is why the Supreme Court even, you know, said the investigation has to be handed over to CBI. It said that, you know, the trial has to be, you know, conducted outside Gujarat, you know, state, because in a way the state institutions were implicated in it. There was this thing that she was not going to get justice in that state. Okay, so at this point of time, the irony is that you're giving that power back to the state. You know, where the institutions totally let her down. So then by this, what are you saying?
And
we
the
have
messaging
to,
is
the
wrong.
message for all us ordinary people,
Yeah.
citizens of this country, is that these men then are being rewarded
Yeah.
not only for committing that crime,
But being born into
but being
a family.
born into a particular community.
Yeah.
I mean, is
Privilege.
this what is this what we have become?
Yeah.
Is this that because I'm a high caste person, because I'm a rich person, because I am, you know, somewhere in a rural in a situation where where I have power in my hand, I can do anything? Is this the message then that you are trying to send out?
Yeah.
Is this the message? Forget rule of law. Is this the rule of humanity? What kind of inhuman acts then are you allowing people to perpetrate with?
And that's the thing, right? Like, it is, humanity is sort of, or should be inculcated in the idea of law, because that's how we would be, that's the most sanest thing to do, which is like, looking at a case like this, you would not think that anyone in the right mind would be able to let go of criminals like this. And the fact that it's already happened and they're out there and they're being celebrated, that itself is a completely wrong message. But then when you think about the situation, like ma'am mentioned, it was during the Gujarat riots, and how much of it has already been silenced. So many stories from the riots of that time, or just that particular incident, 2002 Gujarat riots, are not being spoken about. Is that because of course, the, you know, the ruling party, or are people just forget things over time? Like, we are talking about this now, but let's say 2 weeks down, you know, the lane, we're not even like considering this because we're moving on to another thing. Why does this happen? Like, the span of attention from one case to another, or one thing that's popularized and another that just gets silenced.
See, public memory is short. It's a very old saying. But what matters is that we need to remind ourselves all the time of the kind of horrors that are visiting us. We have to remind ourselves of the kind of history of this particular nation, the violence, and what we have learned from that, how we have progressed from that kind of situation is that matters. Every society has gone through this. It's not that it's only India. But when we have a constitution, when we have an set of institutions which are so protective of rights, a constitution which ensures equality, ensures equal protection, ensures non-discrimination, ensures every possible right which is available. But it's only a mirage. It's not happening. We don't get it. You don't get to see that. It's something which is a big challenge for this country. The second part is that when we talk, in fact, when Madhu was talking relating to the privileges, we're talking in terms of where it comes from. In fact, Ambedkar on 26 November 1949, when he was submitting his constitution to full-ready constitution to the Constituent Assembly, he made a very clear statement that this constitution is going to be successful. We are going to be successful as a society so long as we have constitutional morality. He did not explain constitutional morality in the meeting, but he explained the whole concept of constitutional morality as something which is akin to that the basic humanity which Madhu was referring to. Basic humanity. A state which has concern for the citizen. A state which ensures protection of lives of the citizen. A state which ensures that equal opportunities are available to citizen. To every citizen, these rights are assured. And people live within, the institutions function within such kind of belief systems, such kind of set rule system. That would be the constitutional morality, the nature of constitutional morality. Look at Bilkis Bano's case and million other cases. In fact, it's not just Bilkis Bano. Even as on this day, as we are talking, there are hundreds of cases happening of rape out there, hundreds of cases not being registered, women being pushed out of the system from this. It's happening. In Bilkis Bano's case, for the first time where a detailed investigation took place by CBI, the case had to be transferred from Gujarat to Bombay because there was no possibility of justice. She had to move her house for 20 times because of threats to her life. And after so many processes that the accused got convicted, and to get their convictions upheld, it took under 15 years, 12 years to go through. And in this process, the sentences were passed not only against the persons who committed rape, even against officials, the policemen who failed to do action, who failed to provide kind of protection to this woman. Now, this is something which is in clause. Now, with the construct of this particular thing, in fact, Madhu was referring to what exactly in death sentence is concerned, how different we are relating to retributive constructive justice is concerned. Today we are talking in terms of restorative justice. The construct in all these aspects, which she put it very beautifully, saying there's something called a remorse, a society. Every one of us have a duty that persons like Bilkis Bano. Bilkis Bano is one name, but there's so many, every woman out there who has faced it. We should be in a position to say, sorry, we have not been able to provide you the kind of support or protection. We are sorry. It's the duty of the state, it's the duty of every citizen, it's the duty of every institution, judiciary, legislature, everyone, to stand up and say that we are sorry. We have not been able to provide that kind of support, that kind of, it's a clear case of failure of rule of law.
Yeah. And of course, sorry won't do and sorry won't be enough, but the remorse
The
is at least something.
requirement of this particular case is the way it has happened in this particular case, and very, very aptly presented by Madhu, was that the way these people came out, the way it is being celebrated, demonstrates that they have been heroes of a crime.
Right.
And this act of gang rape and murder is an heroic act. Someone who has done great service to his society. What kind of society we are? I think it's a serious question. And it's the duty of the state and it's the duty of the judiciary to ensure that kind of belief does not come in. It's against the very spirit of the Constitution. It cannot be accepted at any point of time. This is a crime against humanity. It's not just Bilkis Bano. I think that's the way you should look at it. And if you were to get into the legal jargon and trying to find ways within the legal jargon, is not the purpose. It should look into the constitutional perspective. It should look from the protection that's assured in the Constitution. Not from the kind of minimizing it through some statutory process.
And I don't
that's
think
something
there
which is-
should be any space for that as well, because
See-
it's out there that what they've done is completely wrong, and I don't think like there should be, like you said, in other cases there is a point to remit the people, but here I don't
There is
think
a
so.
in the absence of remorse when a person's being treated as a hero is something which shocks conscience of any civilized society.
Right.
Are we civilized? For me, for me, the first question to me is: am I living in a civilized society where a person who commits gang rape and murder is celebrated as a hero?
Or even, are we moving in the right direction, or are we taking like 20 steps back? Or I think
Not
more than
20, we're taking 100 steps back.
Yeah,
I mean,
by
let's
doing
not be
this.
under any
Let's-
illusion.
illusion.
No, we're taking 200 steps
Correct.
back. And the fact that the ones who were honoring, Bilkis, were members of the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. Is this what
Not
you've
Bilkis,
reduced?
the
The rapists are Vishwa Hindus. So is this the Hinduism you want to be proud of? Is this the Brahmin Sanskar you want to be proud of? I mean, please ask yourself that question. Ask yourself that question. Is this the Vishwa Hindu Parishad? This is the Hinduism that you want to take to the whole world. This is the Brahmin Sanskar and you want to be the Vishwa Guru. I just, he spoke about how and you also said about how the system, where in Bilkis's case, that's an irony, and that's a tragedy also. In this case, in the process of her fighting for justice, I mean, you should read some of the judgments. They're really quite remarkable. They show this, not only the rule of law, but they also show the rule of humanity.
Right.
Okay, and in this, like, you know, in the Supreme Court case, you know, where they are in 2019 in the this thing, I just want to read this out because I think this is something that, you know, we need to know, that this is where the law can also reach.
Okay.
And actually where it goes. You know, so here it says, the appellant Bilkis Yaqub Rasool is a victim of riots which occurred in the aftermath of the Bodhra train burning incident in the state of Gujarat on February 27, 2002. While eventually the perpetrators of the crime, including the police personnel, stand punished, the appellant, who was aged 21 years and pregnant at that time, having lost all members of her family in the diabolical and brutal attacks, needs to be adequately compensated. Okay, so they not only kind of say that justice needs to be done to her in terms of punishing the perpetrators, but also she has to be compensated. Okay, that is the nature, the heinousness of the crime. And I'm sad that the Supreme Court says that don't talk about the heinousness of the crime.
Right.
Because it's not just the heinousness of the crime against this one woman. It is the heinousness of the context within which this crime was committed.
Right.
You know, and I think it goes on to say that the appellant, we are informed, is presently about 40 years of age and is without any home and lives with her daughter who was born after the incident. Because she was 5 months pregnant when she was raped, okay? She has been coerced to live life of a nomad and as an orphan and is barely sustaining herself on the charity of NGOs, having lost company of her family members. The gruesome and horrific acts of violence have left an indelible imprint on her mind which will continue to torment and cripple her. These are the words of the Supreme Court. Okay, and then it goes on to say, we do not have to search and elaborate upon principles of law to come to the conclusion that the appellant deserves to be adequately compensated. Okay, and however, this case has to be dealt with differently as the loss and suffering evident from the facts stated above surpass normal cases. And then they go on to, you know, giving her
One aspect in this particular case in Supreme Court on this petition, the Gujarat government said the maximum we can give under law is only 5 lakh rupees.
Yes.
It was a statement affidavit filed by the Gujarat government.
Government.
Supreme Court said nothing to it.
50 lakhs.
50 lakhs.
Supreme Court awarded 50 lakhs. Okay, so in that sense, I think they truly upheld,
Yeah.
you know, and they somewhere recognized the kind of violence that happened.
Right.
You know, not only to Bilkis, as I said, but the entire context within which it happened.
So I think we sort of covered all the points, but if there's any closing statement that, you know, both of you have to make, I think we'll go ahead with that.
Yeah, I think the only closing statement I would like to make is that I hope that the Supreme Court, you know, will exercise its wisdom and really cancel this remission order, because I think that will at least undo some of the harm.
Yeah.
It may not undo all the harm, but it will at least undo some of the harm that has been caused by the release and the felicitation of the rapist, and it will bring some solace to Bilkis Bano, because I think we need to bring, you know, when we're talking of justice, you know, while we're talking of the system, we must never forget the person who's at the receiving end of that injustice. Right. And I think we have to look at her, we have to look into her eyes and say, have we done right by her? And whether it's a Supreme Court or whether as people, as citizens of this country, we should be able to look into her eyes and say, yes, Bilkis, we have fought for justice and we are trying to fight for justice.
Right. So what would you like to say?
It's a very clear case. And we refer to really talk in terms of Bilkis Bano case. We have spoken on many other cases, but we talk in terms of the Bilkis Bano at this point of time. See, court need to look into the construct of the process. We call it as abuse of process of law. If there is this process of law which enables a particular thing, the court should be very mindful how that was applied.
Right.
If there is a remission policy, how that was applied, what were the reasons, whether these reasons are justifiable. If these reasons are justifiable, because when there is a change that need to happen, has any change taken place, any kind of remorse that is demonstrated, exhibited in this case, or that the records demonstrate the decision taken is on sound understanding of the present situation. All those aspects need to be looked into. By and large, all of them look towards that these people have not demonstrated any of that, and therefore the state going out of its way to accommodate
Right.
the remission is something that need to be recorded. So therefore, from that construct, this order is liable to be recorded. It's a as a lawyer, I can say it has to be recorded because it is not a proper order which is taken, and the construct of trying to use the law to suit such process is something which is again not in tune with the system. There is a need that the Supreme Court need to recall this particular order of the government of Gujarat and send these persons back to jail. In Murugan's case, Sri Haran alias Union of India versus Sri Haran alias Murugan's case, Supreme Court made it very clear. Life sentence means till the end of life.
Yes.
We have very clear cases of terrorism, cases of gang rape and murder, cases of
Right.
drugs related to murder,
Yeah.
case of human trafficking relating to murder, getting into resulting in murder. In all those cases, those who have been convicted for life imprisonment are not entitled to remission. Simple, straight. Now, it cannot be looked across, saying that the 2014 law is not applicable because it is 2008 situation. Yes, any law which is in existence, it comes into force from that particular day is applicable, is the understanding of law that we have.
Right.
But look at these particular cases. See, when we talk in terms of the law, we have come across the way this judiciary has looked into. Certain cases, the court has come up and said, why we are taking this decision? Because it affects our collective, it's an affront to our collective conscience. So if it is affront to collective consciousness is something which is used.
Right.
Is not Bilkis Bano case a case that affects our consciousness? It is. It should. It
And
should
it should be, and
affect
if
our
it isn't,
conscience.
then we should question ourselves.
It should affect our conscience, and that should be the mirror through which there is the lens through which the court should look at the case of Bilkis Bano. And therefore, when you look from that construct, the only resulting possibility that can be seen is that the order of the Gujarat government has to be recalled. These people need to be sent to serve their remainder part of the life sentence. It's a duty, which is it's a constitutional responsibility.
So I think with that being said, like Sir rightly mentioned and ma'am had very valid points, this is a case of, systematic failure. We have already failed, and to not make it worse, I think the Supreme Court hopefully looks at this with, a lens of consciousness and a lens of serving justice to not just her, but also show as an example to all the other women that have faced a crime like this, to believe in the system once again, at least a small ray of hope, and hopefully it doesn't leave a scar in the history of India like most other cases have been there. So yeah, with that, I'd like to thank you for your time, and with this we end today's discussion. I'm Gardana Simran and you're watching us on Salar.